I'd like to gavel in the Development Review Commission meeting of Wednesday, September 8th, 2021. Our first order of business will be the call to order. Kat?
Shear?
Here.
Arthur?
Here.
Smith?
Here.
Silent?
Here.
Poinsett?
Here.
And Craig Berardi and Jason Frankel are absent this evening.
Thank you, Kat. Our first order of business is findings on AP 21-03. Permit number, I believe, is 499-21-000910 tree. A request for the approval of a Type 2 permit to remove 23 Type 2 trees to construct a single-family dwelling and driveway. This site is located at 17930 Key Lock Road. The staff coordinator is Jessica Maury Collins, Associate Planner. Are there any comments on the findings, gentlemen?
Mr. Chair, I would move to approve the draft findings, conclusions, and order for this AP 21-03 as submitted.
Second.
So moved.
Shear?
Yes.
Arthur?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Silent?
Yes.
Poinsett?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Now we move on to, excuse me, the public hearing. And tonight's public hearing is on LU 21-0036, a request for the development review permit and design variances for a new mixed-use residential, commercial, and hotel development on the North Anchor site. Sorry, I'm fogging up here. Now I can't read the numbers. Okay. The site is located at 500 First Street, 521 First Street, and 33-41B Avenue, 50 and 504 North State Street. The tax IDs are 21E03DD00500, 21E03DD00400, 21E03DD00300, and 21E0DD01200. The staff coordinator is Eric Olson, Senior Planner.
Mr. Chairman, I'll read the procedures for the hearing.
Thank you.
This land use request is considered based upon the applicable criteria and standards. The staff report lists the criteria and standards identified by staff as applicable to the request. It was available online and at the planning desk. Testimony and evidence must be directed towards the applicable criteria. Please specifically identify to the Commission the criteria or standards you are addressing so the Commission may consider your testimony in relation to the criteria or standards that you are addressing. If you do not identify the criteria or standards that you are addressing, the Commission is not obliged to guess which standards or criteria you are testifying about and may not consider your testimony in its decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the Commission and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes raising the issue to the City Council and to the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. The failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with specificity to allow the Commission to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. The public hearing process is as follows. First, there will be a presentation by staff, then testimony by the applicant up to 20 minutes, followed by testimony by parties in support of the application, testimony by parties opposed to the application, and finally by those neither for nor against the application. Individuals will be allowed up to 5 minutes. Any person in attendance may cede his or her time for testimony to another person except to the applicant, but in no case shall any person's testimony be increased to greater than 10 minutes. Recognized neighborhood associations, homeowner associations, government or government agencies, or other incorporated public interest organizations are allowed up to 10 minutes. Following that would be the applicant's rebuttal up to 5 minutes, and then the Commission deliberation, including a statement to the applicant by the Commission of any proposed conditions of approval different than contained in the staff report, and the applicant's response to the Commission's conditions of approval proposed following Commission deliberation. Those time limits do not include time spent responding to questions from the Commission. Testimony by our attorneys, representatives, and witnesses on behalf of, or which is part of the presentation by a person, shall be counted within that person's time limit. It is assumed the persons are testifying on their own behalf unless they expressly identify the recognized neighborhood association, homeowner association, government or government agency, or other incorporated public interest organization they are representing. A potential conflict of interest is declared on behalf of each of the DRC members to the extent of their business or employment, which each will identify. Unless declared otherwise, the respective DRC member does not have a known, present, or anticipated future business relationship with the project or the applicant. It is possible that a future business relationship could arise in the initiation, design, construction, or maintenance of the project through either the employment or business of the DRC member personally or through relatives defined in ORS 244-020. At this point, I would ask the commission members to please declare if you've had any ex parte contacts, including a site visit, if you have bias on the application, any financial conflicts of interest, and please declare your business or employment. Commissioner Poinsett.
No conflict.
Do you have any ex parte contacts? Have you visited the site?
None.
You have not, and any bias in the application?
Nope.
And your business or employment?
Nothing.
You have no business or employment?
Not with this project.
No, your general business or employment?
My general business is in construction consulting, yes.
Okay. All right. Commissioner Arthur?
Good evening. I'm Randy Arthur. I'm a civil litigation attorney at the Portland, Oregon office of Bullivant Hauser Bailey, a law firm. I frequently, if not daily, drive by this site, but have not made a site visit per se. I have no financial interest and no disqualifying bias. I have followed, as a citizen from time to time, news reports about this site over the years. I did cause a conflicts check to be run at my law firm, and it turns out that, and I will disclose, Urban Development Partners Northwest is listed as an entity with interests adverse to a client of our firm in Seattle on a couple of issues. I'm not involved in those matters. Kittleson and Associates is listed as a client of our Portland office on 3 matters of which I have no involvement. As an of-counsel attorney, I derive no direct or indirect financial benefit from our firm's work on those matters. Also, one of our attorneys apparently has a relative working for R&H Construction, so I wanted to make those disclosures.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Jeff Shearer. I'm a retired contractor. I have no bias, no ex parte contact, and no financial bias either. I'm worked on projects with both R&H and Hacker Architecture, and that doesn't have any impact on this case.
Okay.
My name is Kirk Smith. I'm a real estate attorney with the Portland office of Buchalter, and I ran a conflicts check. And although Urban Development Partners Northwest, the applicant, did not reveal any what we call hits on our conflict system, a former client, Urban Development Partners, was indicated in a report. That file has been closed, and the attorney that was responsible for that matter is no longer with Buchalter, and I had no involvement with Urban Development Partners. I did not visit the site. I have no ex parte contacts, no bias, and no additional financial conflicts of interest.
My name is Mark Silent. I'm a local business owner. I've had no ex parte contacts related to this matter. I have not done a site visit. I have no biases and no financial conflicts of interest.
Okay, thank you. Is there any challenge to Commissioner's right to consider the application? Hearing none, Senior Planner Olson with a staff report, please.
Thank you, Deputy City Attorney Boone. Good evening, everyone. This is my first presentation to the DRC, so I just want to introduce myself. My name is Eric Olson, and I'm with, obviously, the Planning Department. I'm a senior planner. Here tonight to talk to you about the proposed development at what is referred to as the North Anchor property in downtown Lake Oswego. Before I get into those details, I did want to touch on some additional evidence and testimony that we received after the staff report was published. So this was summarized in a supplemental staff memo that was sent out earlier today. And this includes Exhibits E40 through E46, Exhibit F15, and Exhibit G100. So these exhibits primarily consist of revised materials submitted by the applicant to show compliance with Downtown Redevelopment District window height standards, to show voluntary sidewalk dedications along B Avenue and other areas of the site, to reflect changes made for compliance with clear sight distance requirements, to correct information related to the number of mechanized parking spaces, which I will discuss later in the presentation, as well as to correct some information in the tree inventory. It also included one letter that we received in support of the application. So today I'll focus my presentation primarily on code compliance and highlighting most of the standards, but focusing on the larger issues as much as possible, and I'm happy to provide more details if the commissioners have any questions. We also have engineering staff here tonight to answer compliance questions about stormwater, site distance requirements, utilities, right-of-way improvements, and things of that nature. All right, so this is the site that we're talking about. You can see it's located roughly, along B Avenue between State Street and the sort of alley between 1st and 2nd Street, the north side of B Avenue. So it's, just to go over the addresses again, 500 through 520 and 525 1st Street, 27, 33 through 41 and 95 B Avenue, as well as 504 North State Street. And so we've really, as we've worked through this project, broken down the project into 3 separate parcels, and so that'll be pretty fundamental to getting through the discussion tonight. So parcel A, so it's parcels A, B, and C. You can see that parcel A is the the westernmost parcel on the northwest corner of B Avenue and 1st Street. Parcel B is on the northeast corner of B Avenue and 1st Street. It's the middle parcel, and parcel C is on the northwest corner of B Avenue and North State Street. So the site is zoned EC, as you can see, and it's located in the Downtown Redevelopment Design District. The site is also located in the first edition Forest Hills Neighborhood Association. It's surrounded primarily by other EC uses in the EC zone district. This ranges from retail and office developments to the north, a city-owned property that is an entrance to a parking structure to the east, office and residential developments to the west, and a gas station, an auto repair shop, and some other assorted retail uses to the south. So properties in this location have been identified by the city for a redevelopment project for many years now. Back when the Lake Oswego Urban Design Plan was originally developed, it called for a convenience commercial district along this area of B Avenue with a mix of retail, office, and residential uses. And that's evolved quite a bit since then, but we do have a lot of language related to projects of this nature in the East End redevelopment plan as well. That's, we will refer to that as the EERP moving forward because that's a lot of words to get out. But that includes several conceptual projects that would be addressed with this proposal. So Project H is known as the 1st Street North Anchor redevelopment project in that plan. There's also projects that include State Street mixed-use development as well as a hotel development within this area. And so, of course, there's been some stops and starts with different RFPs here at the city on this particular site, and I won't get into that, but we have a current proposal to discuss tonight. So the project includes the following components. It's a development review permit for an approximately 131,000 square foot mixed-use development across 3 buildings on 3 separate parcels. And these consist of hotel, restaurant, retail, and residential uses. So on parcel A, there's a 5-story hotel with 70 rooms, a restaurant, and on-site and on-street parking. On parcels B and C, there are 2 buildings, one in each parcel. The 5-story building is located on parcel B, and a 4-story building is located on parcel C. Those have 66 residential units in total with retail and restaurant uses as well as on-site parking. So multiple design variances are being sought as a component of this application, really to address multiple sort of site constraints that, or the variances are really intended to produce a more well-designed active streetscape, considering that condition, I guess, on the site. In addition, they're requesting 12 trees for removal. By the way, we'll discuss a lot more about the variances later in the project. But in addition, they are requesting 12 trees for removal. The original request was for 14 trees, but the one tree was identified as an invasive tree and will be removed under a separate permit. And another tree was found to be less than 6 inches in diameter and does not need a permit to be removed. So there will be a total of 154 parking spaces between both on-site and on-street parking spaces, several of which would be provided through a mechanized parking matrix which the applicant is also requesting to use as a part of this request for a variance. So again, more on the variances later in the project presentation. So the unified site is zoned EC, which has no required setbacks. The lot coverage in that zone is 100%, and the lot coverage for this proposal ranges from 82 to 95 approximately percent lot coverage. The floor area in the EC zone, the maximum is 3.321, and the proposed overall 3 parcels floor area ratio here is 2.81 to 1. So that I can break that down on each individual parcel, but that's the average. Also, when it comes to the height of the building, those range from 57 to 60 feet depending on the parcel. So that's the maximum height, is 60 feet in this district. The proposal includes 3 new driveways, and all of those are accessed from alleys and comply with the access and on-site circulation standards for emergency access and slope and cross slope and landings. There's ADA compliant pedestrian circulation between interior uses and exterior spaces provided. There's voluntary dedications of additional space on the right-of-way and sort of upgrades to the public sidewalk that have been proposed along with this project. So this is sort of addressing the development standards just really quickly, I guess, for you. Again, we'll go more into the dedications later. Stormwater is proposed to be managed on site, and the applicant is also proposing new crosswalks and curb extensions at the intersection of 1st and B Avenue. So I just wanted to quickly remind folks that the applicant submitted revised numbers for the number of parking spaces provided here. So that should be accounted for in the numbers that I'm talking about tonight. So that's mainly really a revision to the numbers on parcels B and C. And so I'll go over those in just a moment, but those were addressed in exhibits E46 and F15. So on parcel A, which is the hotel development, includes the hotel development, there's a minimum of 63 parking spaces required. They provided 64 spaces here, and 47 of those would be in a matrix system. The other ones would be provided off-street. On parcels B and C, they proposed 90 spaces. It's a required 87 spaces actually on those 2 parcels. So those would be 53 garage spaces, as well as 14 off-street spaces, and 23 within the matrix system itself. In terms of street improvements, the applicant has proposed to dedicate an additional 2 feet along parcel A, so that results in a 10-foot wide sidewalk, an additional 4-foot dedication on parcels B and C, which results in a 12-foot sidewalk. It goes up to 15 feet along the State Street frontage. There's a required setback of 3.5 feet along that particular frontage. So the applicant is also proposing a number of pedestrian courtyards that would feature public art, as well as benches, pedestrian-oriented plantings, trash receptacles, and bollards at the location at the corner at State and B. So on the next 3 slides, I'll go over the downtown redevelopment design standards. I'll try to note when a variance is requested, but again, we'll cover those in detail. We'll directly cover those later in the presentation. So this first section, I'm going to talk about building, siding, and massing, the first slide, rather, of the DRD standards. So one thing you'll note, and you may have noted already, is that the applicant has sort of taken different approaches on parcel A and parcels B and C. So there's sort of a unified design on parcels B and C that addresses the criteria somewhat differently than the proposed hotel development on parcel A. So I'll try to do my best to delineate between the two. So on parcel A, the applicant has proposed a 5-story building, and that would require a variance. They've included a strong corner, really, that's articulated and highlighted by that archway at the corner of the hotel building. On parcels B and C, there's, again, a 5-story building proposed on parcel B, and it's only 4 stories on parcel C. But those corners are similarly, activated by public courtyards, but they do take a different approach to highlighting the prominence of the corner by using public art and just kind of the activation of that streetscape in general. In terms of building design, I'll talk a little bit about that next. On parcel A, the hotel is designed as somewhat of a modern interpretation of the arts and crafts style. That's something that the applicant will talk a little bit more about when they speak to you later. But we found that the proposed building on parcel A does have an architectural form that sort of mimics a steeply pitched gable roof, sort of creates a sense of that roof sort of sweeping down closer to the ground on one side than the other. There's asymmetrical composition used in the hotel, sort of a contrast between a rectangular building form and a sloped projecting other type of building form sort of projecting out of that rectangle. Doing my best to describe the asymmetry here. And it also uses a round arched opening to mark the entry to the hotel, which is another characteristic element of arts and crafts. In terms of the mixed use and residential and retail buildings on parcels B and C, those were designed in a sort of another interpretation of the Oregon Rustic style. So that uses multiple moderately pitched gable roofs that are articulated with A-frame-like facades, as you can see in the image. It's a asymmetrical composition on the plan view. It's kind of H shapes that are not necessarily symmetrical in their orientation, that are sort of responding to the topography and providing different experiences to the pedestrian. They've also used board and batten wood siding on the upper volumes of the proposed buildings on parcel B and C, and that is to add natural rustic texture and color. So in terms of storefront, there are also some building design standards related to storefront appearance that will require a variance as well, so we'll discuss that later. The applicant did, however, submit additional materials, which was addressed in the supplemental memo, that show that they do comply with the windowsill height requirements in the storefront appearance standards in the DRD code. So that's just one thing to point out that we did receive from the applicant recently. And so the variance is to the other portion of the storefront appearance requirements for glazing, a minimum percentage of glazing on each frontage. So there is stucco proposed as well on the upper stories of the hotel building, and that also would require a variance. We'll discuss again that a bit later, but that's intended to reinforce the arts and crafts style that you can see in some of the examples where that stucco is extended to upper floors of the building. There's complementary sort of window design on each building, as well as sort of projecting canopies and other canopies that are created through recessed portions of the buildings. And those are sort of common features on each building that are designed to respond to one another. All right, so this is the third slide about the DRD standards here. So the applicant has met the minimum landscaping requirements on parcels A and B. So on parcel A, they provided the minimum 10% landscaping. Parcel B, they provided 16.6%, where 15% was required. But on parcel C, they've asked for a variance to propose 8.7% landscaping instead of the minimum 15% required. Their landscape design does emphasize, really sort of is designed to highlight an active streetscape, and uses retail courtyards, street furniture, and right-of-way dedications to emphasize that. They've proposed 22 new street trees along First Street, State Street, and B Avenue, and those will be planted in 4x4 tree wells. They've also proposed multiple locations for public art and have shown conditions to ensure the ability to hang flower baskets consistent with the DRD standards. Brick paving, again consistent with DRD standards, will be incorporated into the First Street public sidewalks and crosswalks, as you can see at least partially in the image here. And there will be slate, stone, veneer, landscape planters, and walls to complement either building, and that will be a similar design throughout all 3 parcels. All right, so now to get into the variances requested by the applicant. And so these are, sort of the 5, we'll focus on 2 of those to start with. And these are variances that are subject to the general design variance criteria. And so it's a bit different than the ones that are subject to the DRD specific design variance criteria, which we'll talk about next. And so these first 2 variances, the first one would be a reduction in the landscaping, required landscaping on parcel C. I had just mentioned that would be 8.7% provided. The second one would be the use of a mechanized parking matrix system to provide required parking spaces. And so, I think one commonality that really ties these issues together, or, one thing that led to these requests that is the same for each, is that, there's a bit of a difficulty that, they've found with producing a design that really highlights the city's desired program for the North Anchor site and sort of the vitality of commercial uses, the prominence of the hotel, while still sort of working in the constraints of the site, the size of the site, and the topography of the site. So those are 2 sort of things that really influence these requests for variances, and I'll get into a lot of the other sort of arguments next. So we found that both variances met subcriterion A2, which is essentially that they better accomplish the purposes, goals, or objectives of the base district and any adopted plan or overlay district. And so I had mentioned before that the East End Redevelopment Plan, or EERP, does contain a number of objectives that are really designed to, ensure economic vitality, encourage intensified residential housing development, improve the pedestrian shopping environment through street landscaping, and also sort of has other objectives that are carried forward in other parts of the project, including the aforementioned conceptual projects, Project J for the sort of North Anchor development, and conceptual ideas for a mixed-use project and retail along State Street, as well as a hotel project. So we found that the variances better accomplish those particular goals by really prioritizing the density that would be needed to fulfill the vision in that plan and some of the other sort of urban design plans that have been developed for that area. So the design on parcel C is able to emphasize street landscaping, and so you can see the design of the State Street frontage here on parcel C. And it's designed to emphasize street landscaping and the use of canopy-like plantings to sort of screen the parking that's behind and just sort of encourage a more active streetscape, considering that they needed to sort of fit the parking somewhere in the building. So that seemed like the best way to sort of handle it while still producing a active and vital streetscape. And so, that sort of plays hand in hand into the parking matrix that's been requested here as well, and which does, continue to promote that effective use of space, and sort of, especially on parcel A, really allowing for a boutique hotel that's large and sort of appropriately sized for something that would contain a restaurant and the sort of mix of uses that had been envisioned, again, for that property. So we also found that these two variances complied with subcriterion B2, which is that they help to create a positive, unique relationship to other nearby structures, views, or open space. And so again, we found that, this efficient use of space that's promoted by the parking matrix really allows for, the preservation of views in particular. It also, allows for hotel and lobby spaces to really be sited more prominently on the corner of First and B there. I think when it comes to other parcels on this property as well, it allows retail uses and sort of more active commercial uses to be located along the streetscape in order to, efficiently allocate parking elsewhere on the site, essentially. And so on, the different parcels, I would say, just to address this particular criteria, they really try to forefront the pedestrian experience through, again, there's a voluntary setback, so there's additional dedications on both parcel A and C of differing widths to the sidewalk to really encourage a more active streetscape. And there's also sort of a focus on ground floor landscaping that's allowed through that design feature as well. And I'd also point out, I'll go back to show this, but in terms of the proposed sort of landscaping variance on parcel C, I will point out that there's actually additional landscaped area on the parcel, and you can see this a bit from the ground, but it wasn't able to be counted towards the requirements. There's sort of second story landscaping that you can see. I can try to show it with my pointer. Here we go. Up in this area, this is sort of an amenity area for residents of the building. So there will be some additional green space provided. It just wouldn't be necessarily visible from the ground floor and thus able to be counted towards the sort of landscaping percentages for the purpose of the DRD standard. So again, there's kind of an emphasis on the streetscape and the use of these vertical trellises to tie into other design moves that are used on parcel A. So parcel A and C both sort of have this sort of rhythm of these trellises and vertical vine plantings that are highlighted with this design. So again, that kind of emphasizes the rhythm of storefronts in the downtown area. Again, sort of doing everything they can to make that an active streetscape, considering that there's parking behind it. All right, and so that covers the variances subject to the general design standards. And so I'll move into the variances that are subject to the criteria within the downtown redevelopment design district. So it's a bit different. And this sort of covers the request for 5-story buildings on parcels A and B, the reduction in storefront appearance related glazing requirements. And so that's on certain frontages, I guess, of each of the 3 parcels. And there's also a request to allow the use of stucco on upper stories of parcel A, the hotel building. And so again, this is kind of, a lot of these design moves are really to accommodate the desired mix of uses and program that had been envisioned for the site. Again, considering that it is a relatively small site and that there is a considerable amount of topographical sort of grade change, you can see on even just this slide, there is a significant sort of jump in height along that B Avenue frontage of the parcel A hotel building. So you can see that that would create a bit of a challenge for some of these issues. So, I think generally these are attempts to respond to the site, try to make it as, active of a use as possible while still, fitting in with, I guess, the downtown environment and maintaining that rhythm of the streetscape. And I guess when it comes to the use of the stucco on the upper stories, I think there's a bit of a different argument for that one. It has a little bit more to do with that hotel use itself. I think it's really a lot more focused on highlighting a more individualized and unique expression of arts and crafts style that will sort of provide an iconic sort of distinguishing feature to the hotel itself. And so it is sort of designed in a way to both comply with the requirements for arts and crafts as at the same time as sort of drawing some attention to itself as a unique feature. All right, so for the requested reduction in storefront glazing requirements on Parcel B, this really only affects the First Street frontage. So this is the, sort of moving from, or I guess this is facing Parcel B, the building on Parcel B along the First Street frontage. So with this particular request, we found that compliance with the code would not be practicable, essentially due to the characteristics of the existing site. So this is approximately a 12-foot grade change, apparently, as you go along First Street from the corner up to another portion, the sort of highest portion of the property line. So it is a pretty dramatic grade change, although, that there's certainly steeper slopes, but particularly for an urban project, that does create a challenge. So that was something that we found that due to those sort of topographical constraints, that was something that would be warranted here. It wouldn't be, quite as needed to highlight, glazing when it's just a small portion of, the retail or associated commercial use that I'd be able to see. And so for the other requested variances, we thought that the best argument was that, they really did better accomplish the objectives of, again, that ERP as well as the urban design plan. And so again, we're talking about the variances to allow a 5-story building, reduce the glazing requirements, and use stucco on the upper stories of the hotel in particular. So this, I think we've mentioned before, it does allow for, sort of a sculpted massing that does open up certain views of Mount Hood. The 5th floor in particular opens that up for guests of the hotel. And there is also a walkway on the northern portion of the site where there are additional views that can be had. And so it also provides active hotel uses along prominent frontages and increases the vitality of the district by providing that distinctive building form that I was gesturing about earlier. It really tries to allocate the FAR that's allowed within the district and within the height limit in ways that really can maximize that active use along the pedestrian frontages. So the storefront appearance variance, I think that also screens the parking garage and allows a sort of higher density of uses as well. These kind of work together in certain ways, again, to just make sure that it can be an active use for the hotel and really, encourage that storefront vitality. So again, the requested variance to the stucco on the upper stories helps try to, the attempt at least is to distinguish the hotel building from other buildings in the district while still being complementary in materials and form. And, it's also indicative of the sort of vitality and sense of place emphasized by the urban design plan. So it's an attempt again to create something that does contribute to sense of place. When it comes to parcels B and C, we found that they better accomplish the objectives of these plans, in various different ways as well. So the 5th story on parcel B, we found that that's really able to allow sort of a building form, and it's a bit complicated, but essentially by using the site the way that they have, and by using that 5th story, they're able to get actually a much more reasonably sized ground floor on the B Avenue frontage. So I think the applicant has a few diagrams that show, what would occur if they were to produce just a flat 4-story building within the height limit, and it could reduce in quite a large pedestrian storefront height. So it does sort of produce a more intimate and appropriately scaled storefront experience. And again, it does directly adjust some of these objectives to, support the creation, and this is in the ERP, to support the creation of a 24-hour downtown with a high level of activity. And, a lot of this has to do with the specifics of how we defined a story in the development code. And so, there's really a significant slope on the site that creates a condition in which, the vehicle and service areas can tuck into the higher end of the slope and allow the sort of daylighting of the retail spaces along the B Avenue frontage as a result of that. The variance would basically allow for 4 stories of residential units at least, while still having that sort of parking underneath it on the upper story of the site. So again, it's the upper portion of the site, rather the higher portion of the site. And so it might not actually read as a 5-story building except for very unique sort of isolated areas of the property. In terms of the storefront appearance variance, the storefront treatment on Parcel C, again, was something that was done to, again, highlight the B Avenue frontage, which is a more active streetscape than the State Street frontage. So there's sort of 54% of the facade along State Street. I'll go back to the diagram for a good image of that. So you can see that there's approximately 54% of that that's glazed. It's sort of the southern portion of the facade where the commercial uses would be located. And then the northern half is really intended to screen that parking. And so again, that's really driven by prioritization of the pedestrian realm, locating the parking in the place that would be least impactful to the retail itself. All right, and so there's also, sort of slate stone veneer cladding and the rhythm of these framed openings that, again, is intended to tie into other portions of the site. And those little openings and the niches that are created in the facade here are intended to contain sort of artist-designed laser-cut panels, steel panels, and, that will essentially be trellises for the plantings to grow onto. So for Parcel A, we're going back to Parcel A and just addressing how we found that it complied with sub-criteria B1 and B2 so that, the proposed variances created a positive, unique relationship to other nearby structures, views, or open space and streetscapes, and that they're exceptional in the quality of detailing, appearance, and materials. And so we found that, this accomplishes, the variances accomplish this for many of the reasons that I've already gone over. The 5th story really does respond to topography, and it creates some new views that actually contribute to the asymmetricality of the proposed building. Again, it has a voluntary sort of setback. It sort of pulls back 10 feet from the northern property line, and that's the idea is at least to maintain views essentially for the existing neighboring building at 555 2nd Street of Mount Hood. So that's designed to be a little bit more sculpted to that unique sort of environment of the adjacent properties. So that is designed to really create that positive, unique relationship to nearby structures and preserve the views from adjacent buildings per the variance criteria. The storefront treatment along B Avenue in the hotel really does activate streetscape with similar types of sort of metal cut steel landscape trellises, if you will. And those are intended to, similarly to what you see on State Street, screen the parking behind it in order to allow for a hotel ground floor configuration that locates the most active uses on the corner. So really, instead of windows that you'd just be able to see into the parking, they provided more landscaping and artistic features in these areas. In terms of the use of stucco on the upper stories, it's something that's not typically allowed in the DRD, which is why it's something that requires a variance. But it is true to the arts and crafts style, and we've seen a lot of examples of arts and crafts buildings that do have that stucco on upper stories. And again, that's something that the applicant will talk about. It's a material that's actually specifically allowed on the ground floor in this zone for several different buildings. It's one of the sort of materials that are required to be used, a selection of materials that are required to be used for the ground floor. In terms of the proposal, they proposed a design that does not utilize EIFS foam-based artificial stucco and instead uses true cement plaster stucco on metal lathe, giving the facades enhanced durability. That's a quote from the applicant's narrative. So I will close the variance discussion with a brief, sort of overview of how the proposal on parcels B and C addresses these same criteria. We found that the 5th story, again, produces a more inviting retail storefront height in response to topography along that B Avenue frontage in the most successful way I think that they probably could in this particular circumstance. It helps to produce a higher quality design by producing a ground floor height that allows for an enhanced pedestrian environment along that prominent frontage. And so without that frontage, it would either be an oversized ground level at the lowest point along B Avenue, And, it would either be a very tall frontage or a very sort of small frontage, depending on the design. So this is somewhere sort of nicely in between, hopefully. So again, the screens that are used on that State Street frontage are similar with the sort of laser cut panels that will allow shade to pedestrians. They're actually vertical plantings that are designed to create a canopy in and of themselves. So there will be landscape and art on that frontage, and that's similar to treatments in other places on the site. All right, so just to go over tree removal really quickly, they needed to remove 12 trees for on-site construction and sidewalk improvements here. It is a constrained development area, so there were no reasonable alternatives. And there would be, again, that additional one invasive tree and one small tree that were shown on the plans that would not formally need to be part of the proposal as approved. And so that should cover it. The recommendation from staff is to approve as conditioned.
Thank you, Eric. Are there any questions from the commission to staff? Mark?
What are the peak heights along the roof line of each of these, and what are the acceptable limits?
They have obviously a number of peaks, so there are different heights. The tallest of them is 60 feet, the way that we would judge it, but there are a few that get pretty close. There might be more than one peak at 60 feet in height, but it is right at the maximum.
Kirk?
Mr. Wilson, I have a couple of questions on the report and I guess the arguments and concurrence of staff. The first one is on the reduction of the 15% minimum landscaping to 8.7. I read through the analysis on page 28, and maybe you did a really good job of kind of walking through that, but I was struggling with the argument that reducing landscaping better accomplishes the purposes or objectives of the East End Commercial or Downtown Design District. And maybe it's because I'm a real estate lawyer. It sounded like the Planning Commission and the City Council wanted 15% landscaping, even in this district. But that landscaping, from my perspective, was replaced by, I would call it hardscape or streetscape. And so maybe you can elaborate a little bit more, because I was just not, other than better accomplishing the purposes of this economic district of having more, square footage, I kind of struggled with that, so.
Yeah, I think I can just, summarize the argument as best I can, I suppose, and hopefully that will help. Okay. But I'm not sure I can answer all those questions necessarily. I think that the concept is really that a landscaped, providing more landscaped area, on another portion of the site that's not, a prominent frontage, would produce a less active, streetscape on the B Avenue portion of the site. So I guess the idea is really to highlight as much as possible those more prominent frontages and really focus the landscape design on the streetscape, again, to sort of comply with the urban design plan and the ERP. I don't know if there's anything else you'd want to add to that, but I'm sure that the applicant can go into a little bit more detail as to their arguments there. But I think, essentially the argument is that the applicant's proposing more vertical plantings and other types of plantings that might better activate the streetscape instead of a larger sort of ground floor surface area.
Okay.
I can elaborate a little bit
Sure,
more on that
thank
as well, if you don't mind. Jessica Numanwu, Planning Manager. In addition, I would note that the code requires the landscaping on the lot. And even though this site consists of, they're developing it as a sort of unified development, they are located on individual lots. This particular parcel is the smallest of the three. And the way that we calculate landscaping is it's the plan view. We don't count vertical landscaping area, so they have to provide that 15% on the ground. And because of the constraint of that lot, in order to comply, because it's smaller than the other lots, and they have a lot of programming that they have to fit in there. There's underground parking that's included in there, as well as retail space. And so what they found is that their argument is if they complied, it wouldn't provide as a vibrant and pedestrian-friendly streetscape. You'd have more landscaping, but you would have less area for these necessary functions for the development, which all add to the vitality of the downtown. So I would just add that too as well, that's discussed in their argument, and to point out that this particular lot is much smaller than the other two lots involved in the site.
Okay, and then my second question is on this, you said the stucco. And I went through I looked at the analysis on page 54, and when I originally came on the DRC, there were architects, and I'm no architect, so arts and crafts, okay. But, and maybe it's because I'm from Southern California that, I grew up with stucco and concrete stucco, and it just struck me that the hotel kind of looks like something you would see in San Clemente or something like that. And so maybe you can maybe help me with the report that I saw the triangular arts and crafts asymmetrical building, but then part of the argument was that it's like a monolith of stone that's been chiseled or something like that. And so I'm trying to figure out how you go from coming to the Northwest and then having this like Oswego style and the cool North Rustic Oregon and all that, only to have what being from Southern California looks like stuff I grew up with in Southern California. So I'm just kind of curious how those kind of fit together.
Yeah, I think, again, that's something that the applicant might be able to really talk a little bit more about their inspiration and sort of how they drew that connection to the arts and crafts style. But I would say that, the use of the sort of arched openings in particular is a pretty prominent feature. There are some images that I've included here that do show some fairly prominent local examples of arts and crafts buildings. That you can see is sort of on the bottom left here on the slide, where they do utilize that sort of steep pitch and the sort of idea of sloping down from that steep pitch and sort of having that pitch project from another type of building form. So I think that's really the type of arts and crafts building that the applicant is seeking to create. I think there's a lot in the code that would prevent this particular interpretation of that arts and crafts style that does sort of, it's included in the appendix that we have in the code as examples of arts and crafts, but the DRD requirements would require the use of different materials on the upper story. So I think the idea is really to create this sort of, again, this more unique interpretation of the arts and crafts feature that's still a pretty prominent version of what people do to talk about when they talk about arts and crafts buildings. That wouldn't be possible otherwise through the DRD code. In terms of the color, I do think it's worth noting that it is lighter in color than many of the buildings nearby, including the other building on parcels B and C, and I think that was a deliberate decision. I think there's certainly a lot of more abstract inspiration, as you were alluding to, with the mountains and sort of being carved out of a large form that I think the applicant would be the best party to talk about a little bit further. But in terms of, I can speak to at least the arts and crafts portion of it and say that, it is a unique interpretation of that style. I think that's kind of what we saw, but we were able to see the inspiration for it and having that connection back to a lot of prominent examples of that style.
Randy?
Thank you. I appreciated your thorough summary of the application, Senior Planner Olson. And I noted you referred to the importance of enhancing the pedestrian experience, promoting an active streetscape, having a vibrant pedestrian-friendly streetscape, which reminded me over the years in the public forum discussing the development of the North Anchor site, some discussion has been given to having a festival street on First, a street that could be shut off occasionally, maybe Saturday mornings or for other events, for pedestrian use only, not to automobile traffic, possibly an annex to the farmer's market that might draw pedestrians northward along the street, hopefully patronizing and supporting businesses along the street. So I just wondered if there was any thought being given by the city in conjunction with the developer to accommodating some type of festival street development as part of this proposal.
As a part of this proposal, I don't think that is in the works, at least that I know of. I know that that had been discussed at various points with certain proposals that came through the RFP. But I think the applicant, again, can answer that maybe a little bit more directly in terms of design treatments that may make that more feasible, particularly the curb extensions and, the sidewalk improvements would lend themselves to that type of use.
I think that the project where it, at First and B, would be the terminus of that festival street. So I don't think there was any intent to carry it beyond, further down First Street. But I think that the design would certainly be conducive to that being a terminus for that festival street. But B Avenue is a pretty, it's a pretty busy street, and I believe it's a collector. But I still think it could be possible, I suppose, if the city wanted to close it down and have that be the terminus. Otherwise, I think it kind of bookends the terminus of that festival street that you're right, is intended to have to be shut down and used just primarily for pedestrian use for festivities and events.
And I guess I would ask, specifically, staff didn't find the criteria for that, nor was there
Correct.
a treatment in the variances to that. Okay,
Correct.
So,
They were not required to do that per
No,
code.
I would think that would be something the city would need to initiate and to work in accommodation, perhaps with the development. But it sounds like that's nothing in the works. I just wanted to raise that. Thank you.
Bruce? No questions? Okay. So now we move, now, before we move on to testimony by the applicant, I want to remind those who are here and want to speak tonight, do we have a sign-up sheets, Kat? Okay, there's sign-up sheets in the back so we can know who's going to speak and whether you're for, against, or neutral. So without any further ado, the applicant. We have and Evan will keep time.
is your mic on, or? Still not? Red is on.
red is, oh, yep.
Oh,
there we
your
go.
time is up.
That was on purpose. All right. Thank you so much for having us this evening. My name is Sarah Zahn. I'm the Director of Development at Urban Development Partners and representing the owner developer this evening. I want to just say thank you to all of you for having us this evening, and also thank you to staff for the work that they've done with us on this project. It's been a tremendous effort and collaboration, so really appreciate the work that Eric and Jessica and their team have put into this project so far. We were awarded this project back in February 2020 through a competitive RFP right at the beginning of COVID. So it's been quite an interesting ride as we've worked to design and develop and prepare for this this moment, in fact. And so it's really great to be here and be at this time in the project. So I just wanted to mention, you know, how excited we are about what we think this project is going to produce for the city of Lake Oswego and the downtown at this North Anchor, you know, new housing, a new boutique hotel, ground floor restaurant, vitality of pedestrian experience and economic benefit to the city. Also just want to mention that you're aware that this is a public-private partnership with the city, and we're in the middle right now of negotiating our disposition and development agreement with the city for the purchase of these properties. And we're also very excited about the possibility of creating some workforce housing as part of our proposal. So it's not part of the land use application, but I just wanted to note that we're hoping to achieve 8 units of workforce housing affordable to families earning around 80% of median family income as part of our proposal. I'm going to turn this over right away to the architects, and this is really their show tonight, but it's my job to just quickly introduce our team. So in addition to Urban Development Partners, we have Hacker Architects here, and I'm here tonight with Chris Hodney and Scott Barton-Smith, who will be giving the majority of the presentation, as well as a number of other supportive characters in the background. We also have representatives from our civil engineer, Vega, and our landscape architect, Ground Workshop, as well as Kittleson and Associates, who's been working with us on our traffic engineering. In case there are questions, they are available this evening. Not here tonight is our hotel operator, which is Mosaic Hotels. They're out of California, so they're a key team member for us as we move forward in the development of the hotel. And also not here this evening, but a key team member is R&H Construction, our general contractor. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Chris and actually cede my seat to Scott. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, and good evening, everyone. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Chris Hodney. I'm a principal and the multifamily director on the project, and I'm joined by my colleague, Scott Barton-Smith, who's the director on the hotel. And we're both up here representing a larger team, some of which are behind us. And we have our engineers here as well to answer any questions. I'm also going to start with an overview, kind of where the inspiration, both are just architectural character that influenced the design, and we're each going to speak independently about the design inspiration to meet the architectural styles as required in the code as well. Every project in our office, we tend to start by not just looking at the architectural context immediate to the building, but we look a bit deeper through research in the history and the culture and the people and community of the place. And our goal is to really dig in and find what's the real authentic character or spirit of a place that influences the architecture, and how can that show up in some modern way in our design. And in Lake Oswego, some of the aspects of Lake Oswego that we see as core to the character is the importance of nature, the elements of nature and the topography, and the access to nature as well, and the desire for community. Lumber and water, iron ore, were obviously incredibly influential to the industrial roots of the city, at least as we know it today. And you can see that in the architecture of the old industrial buildings at the Oregon Iron Company, the blast furnace, which still exists down at George Rogers Park, and even the country club architecture, for example. But we also see that people from the beginning and until now have largely been drawn to the city for the community, but also the direct access and proximity to nature and the ability to find solitude and recreation and build community in nature as well. And we see some of these values actually in the architecture surrounding the site downtown as well. What this slide shows is there's a variety of styles of architecture and forms and materials that are used within the downtown. But a lot of times the materials are nature-inspired or natural themselves. They often have kind of a fine scale, a residential scale, if you want to call it that, and a level of texture or natural variation that's only found in natural materials. There's also a really strong emphasis on the pedestrian and public spaces. That's where this community building and enjoying and socializing in nature comes from. Many of the buildings have tall, heavily glazed ground floors that promote those very active pedestrian streetscapes, usually around a 14-foot tall to 20-foot tall ground floor reading, so a very nice public scale, but not overly sized. And then sites are punctuated by a variety of outdoor seating spaces and landscape courtyards, plazas, and alleys. Our proposed design is 3 mixed-use modern buildings and right-of-way improvements, which together are creating a pedestrian anchor to First Street. This rendering here is on First Street looking north, and as well as revitalizing the commercial core on B Avenue and State Street. The designs draw on modern interpretations, as Eric said, of our selected architectural styles and our broader understanding of the Lake Oswego character. And the buildings work together to reinforce and complement some of the existing patterns of the district, particularly the ground floor architecture, to create the most engaging pedestrian experience we can on the site. As you see in this image, and we'll articulate later, we've intentionally decided to differentiate the design of the hotel, both in style and material. And we did this in particular to maintain what we thought is a contextually appropriate scale of the overall development. But we also saw an opportunity to use the materialities to speak to one another in a way that highlighted the different use between the buildings, as well as give prominence to the more public buildings. I'll touch on this quickly. I know Eric covered some of this. The right-of-way improvements in general, there's significant improvements that we're making on all frontages in efforts to bring the level of pedestrian safety and activity and just the general character of the sidewalks to the same level that you see in some of the more redeveloped areas of downtown, particularly around A Avenue and First Street and the Windward and Lakeview Village. This includes the widened sidewalks, all new street trees at a denser spacing, bulb outs at the intersections and alleys for pedestrian safety and furnishability, and then specialty inlay paving along First Street. As Eric mentioned also, we are providing a 3.5-foot dedication along State Street and 4-foot dedications at parcels B and C on B Avenue, as well as a 2-foot dedication on B for parcel A, and that's in efforts to provide a furnishable and usable sidewalk. Last thing to note is you'll see in the next slide, the ground floor and parking utilizes almost the entire footprint of the site down below grade or at the lower level. But at the upper floors, all 3 buildings pull back from their north property line in some way. And that's to provide pedestrian access, preserve the views, which Eric noted, as well as provide opportunities for additional landscaping and private porches that will serve the residences at those levels. This ground floor diagram shows that as much as we tried to locate program to activate all the pedestrian frontages with commercial storefront and active plazas and courtyards. And at the northwest end of the site where you see the blue, which is to represent ground floor residences, landscaping and terracing landscaping adjacent to the sidewalk. We're providing structured parking on site for all the parcels, and we've carefully located the parking and the building surfaces to be accessed off the alley. and away from the pedestrian frontages as much as possible. And due to the grade change, these parking garages are buried at the north and northwest ends of the site. And those levels actually daylight as full stories at the retail, or along B Avenue, excuse me. And so we've lined that with retail space as much as possible. The two exceptions of that being a portion of the hotel facade along B Avenue and a portion of the State Street facade there on the far east. And in those locations, that's where we're utilizing a mixture of specialty landscaping and art screening, which we'll talk about later. For the multifamily buildings, we've chosen to design them in a modern interpretation of the Oregon Rustic style. This style is particularly known for lodges and recreational facilities in our national parks, and sometimes it's called parkitecture for that reason. Some good examples, local examples, are the Silcox Hut. They're on the bottom right, and better known as Timberline Lodge. Both of these are up at Mount Hood. And the architects who invented this style and authored this style at the time were looking for something new, an architecture that they believed had more meaning and authenticity and simplicity and utility. And of importance is they held a strong reverence for nature and community and family as well. The buildings were often where the public could come together and congregate and enjoy and admire our country's most impressive natural surroundings. And the architecture was intentionally designed to harmonize with and fade into those surroundings. Given the remote sites that these buildings were built on, the buildings were often intentionally utilitarian and efficient in the floor plan and the material and detail. One of the hallmarks of the style is authentic use of plan and structure, and the expression of an efficient floor plan laid out on a rugged site to best take advantage of views often had the visual effect of asymmetry on the form, which is another hallmark of the style. Similarly, varied roof lines were providing weather protection, but more importantly, were reflecting authentically the scale and use of the rooms within. Materials often were stone, whether it's stone boulders or ledge stone at the ground floor, just simply from durability and often locally sourced. And upper floors were simple wood siding, board and batten siding, often unfinished, vertically oriented for weathering. And they provided a really nice fine texture of shadow and color variation as well. The reason we chose the Oregon Rustic style as our inspiration for the multifamily buildings was we felt it aligned with our overall vision of what the multifamily buildings would do in the development. In particular, the natural mid-tone or darker toned materials, which were intended to blend in and fade away into the natural surroundings. We thought this made sense to us that the residential floors, being a little more private than, say, a hotel or retail, should be allowed to recede into the skyline more than the other parts of the building, and allow the more public retail and hotel building itself to stand out and be prominent. And so this view is the primary view from the intersection of First and B, and shows off in the distance on the right, you can see the gabled ends of the east building as well. Both multifamily buildings are utilizing a similar architectural style. However, we've varied the orientation of the roof lines and the courtyards to allow them to uniquely respond to the topography and create a variety of pedestrian experiences at each street. The upper volumes have moderately pitched roofs, which stagger and step down the slope of the site and maintain a 4-story reading at all the public frontages. And these volumes come to rest on a stone veneer base, which begins at the north along First on the left there as terracing landscaping and sidewalls, and it emerges at B Avenue and State Street as highly glazed commercial frontage. The primary facades of the building and the roof lines are articulated by projecting balconies, which you can see there on the right, roof terraces at the top, stacking window openings, while the gabled ends, which are prominent in this view, are differentiated with stained wood siding and a vertical window expression. The overall material palette of the building is directly inspired from the Oregon rustic architecture, with warm neutral colors for the upper floors and natural tones. Upper materials are primarily a tightly spaced fiber cement board and batten siding with black commercial grade vinyl windows. And at the gabled ends, the rich color of the stained true wood siding. This unique installation of the battens, this tighter spacing, provides kind of a modern take on the texture and fine scale that's reminiscent of the historic residences and industrial buildings of the Oregon Iron Company, as well as the board and batten siding of Timberline Lodge. Apologize, I skip forward one slide. This shows the retail courtyard at the corner of First and B, and we have a similar courtyard at all the primary intersections. But with this grand architectural gesture, we're providing all-season outdoor seating adjacent to the retail that's open to the sidewalk, but under the cover and protected, under the cover of the building and protected from above. Here we're showing a low planter with integrated seating on the public side, and a sculpture at the corner, which maintains the openness and visibility to the courtyard, but holds the corner and allows a transition between the sidewalk grades. At the corner of State and B, we're providing a similar courtyard, but at a different scale, as you can see here, just due to the grade change. And between these courtyards, they're connected by a rhythm of stone frames, storefront windows, and secondary retail entries, which continue all the way from the southwest corner at First along B Avenue and wrap the corner for the entire frontage of State Street. And it's important to note that what the variance on Parcel B for the number of stories is allowing us to do is maintain a 14-foot to 21-foot ground floor height, which is consistent with patterns within the district. And last, on State Street, looking closer at the area where we have parking, and we're screening parking along State Street. So rather than providing storefront, we're proposing an enhanced level of landscaping and this layered artist design steel screening. You're also seeing overhead, rather than solid canopies in this location, we're proposing planted trellises to provide some almost like planted canopies in this location. And on the right, we have a couple different ideas of how the layering and planting could work. On the upper image is an example in Portland where they rely mostly on lower planting and grasses, and then much more shadow and interest in the design of the steel screen in this case. And down below is an idea of utilizing steel cables that are woven in an interesting way to look beautiful and provide a lot of shadow year one when the plants are lower, but as the plants mature and grow up, they would actually take on that shape as well and become much more prominent in the design. And with that, I'm going to hand off to Scott Barton-Smith to describe the hotel. I see that.
It looks like we have very little time. May I take a few more minutes beyond the 20 minutes?
Sure, go ahead.
All right, appreciate that.
Take 3 or 4 minutes more. You had trouble at the first.
Oops. All right, I'm Scott Barton-Smith, and I'm going to give you a tour of our proposed design for the hotel. Hopefully this will answer some of the questions that came up. So when we were the thing about a hotel is that it is intended to cater to visitors to your community. And therefore, it really wants to be something that is readily identifiable and locatable for visitors that are just rolling into Lake Oswego, say from State Street or from the South Anchor. Another way to say that is a hotel really wants to be an extroverted building. in that it wants to feel natural in its community, but also wants to stand in contrast somehow to its surroundings. So when we started to think about the design of the building and to look into the planning requirements, we were trying to find a way to make an extroverted building in the hotel. I'll just move this. What we were really struck by the option of the arts and crafts style in the Lake Oswego Code, because what we noticed in that is that the architects of the arts and crafts movement, including an architect named Pipes, who was a local architect who was doing arts and crafts building in Lake Oswego, as well as in other places in the Portland area, as well as architects, were all doing something that had a characteristic that was particularly extroverted. And that characteristic tended to be white stucco. But to them, it was more than just a material that you would select for the outside of the building. It was doing something really interesting. And you can see on these examples on the right-hand side of the slide here, that white stucco was used to allow the buildings to stand apart from, in contrast to their landscape surroundings, but they were also kind of nestled into the landscape. The white facade was also a blank slate that allowed a playful organization of the windows and a concentration of detail at those windows. So the detail wasn't so much in the facade, it was really in the openings and in the arches that mark the entry. So that seemed very appropriate for our hotel building. The other aspect that we really liked about arts and crafts was that it was inspired by nature and local traditions. And we love that because we find that buildings are always better when they give people a connection to the landscape and a connection to the community that they're within. So when we're thinking about the arts and crafts building, we're also thinking about a connection to landscape and a connection to Lake Oswego. Let me explain that a little bit better. Starting on the left-hand side of the screen, when we're thinking stucco, we're thinking a material that is faithful to the arts and crafts style, that's durable and is long-term, it's a high quality, but we're also thinking there's a connection to Mount Hood, which is prominently visible from the site. When we're thinking about a contrasting material for the roof and for the stone veneer at the base of the building, we're also thinking about the geology of the Willamette Valley and basalt. When we're thinking about that concentration of detail that the arts and crafts architects like to do at the openings of the building, we are thinking about the local traditions. As Chris mentioned, the lumber industry that was historically here in Lake Oswego and the steel industry. So we're seeing a concentration of detail at the windows that brings warmth of wood and the contrast of dark metal. And so this is probably the most extroverted corner of the building. This is from the southeast corner. You'll notice a mountain motif here in the white stucco that really culminates at the corner and is really anchored by these entry arches at the corner of B and First. You'll also notice that the upper stories, although they are all stucco, you notice that upper stories are also recessed with balconies. And the intent of the upper story material change in the code, we understand, is to soften the upper stories. We believe we're achieving that better by literally setting back upper stories that really allows those upper stories to recede in space and really focus attention on this mountain motif in the corner. Some other things you'll notice from this image is that the ground floor windows are set deeply into alcoves that are landscape planted. The arches and the balconies that are within that mountain have beveled surfaces. And all of that contributes to making the white stucco feel more than a 2D surface, but making it really feel like a thick surface, like a carved object, as you mentioned, Mr. Smith. You'll also notice that the windows are organized not in a grid, but in a staggered pattern that kind of points towards the peak of the mountain. So it was really important for us to introduce that, those staggered window patterns. Zooming in a little bit on the arches at the entry, this is the entry to the hotel and to the restaurant. And you can see it's a large area, so that will be outdoor seating for the restaurant. And then these are the south and east elevations, east on top, south on the bottom, where you can see the glazing that is within those deep alcoves. The restaurant is on the east side of the building, and that glazing wraps around and through the arches to a portion of the south facade, and then where you don't see glazing at the back of the alcoves, that is the vertical planting art pieces that Eric described to you earlier. And you'll notice how, whether there's glass or not in those alcoves, they have the same architectural treatment from the street, so there's a real rich play of light and shadow and real depth given to the facade. It also has the benefit of making a wider perceived pedestrian space that is softened by landscape. And then ultimately, all that landscape is a real arts and crafts mechanism of allowing the building to really nestle into the landscape, like some of those historic examples that I showed you. This is from the southeast corner, and we're raised above the ground here to allow you to see the partial fifth story that we're proposing. And the important thing about this is that the massing steps up the hill with the steep grade. There's about 20 feet of grade across this site. And so that fifth floor is only in the northwest corner where the grade is the highest. And this kind of angle is generally where you can best see that fifth floor, because we've designed it in such a way that the pedestrian experience has a 4-story reading no matter which side of the building you're on. And that's because we're stepping up the hillside. You can see that a little bit better from this angle. This aerial view is from the northeast looking southwest. You notice the partial fifth floor here. And you'll also notice this voluntary setback on the north property line that Eric mentioned. The property line is actually where this wood fence is. And so we think about the partial fifth floor that we're requesting as a reallocation of space that we would have built in that 10-foot setback, but actually removing it from the north side and putting it on top of the building. And that has several advantages. The first advantage is that there's residences. The 555 Second is behind the building to our north and west, and this partial fifth floor screens the mechanical that you can see on this edge and over here from those residences. The second advantage is that, as Eric mentioned, this voluntary setback on the north side actually preserves some eastern views of Mount Hood for folks in the 555 building. And then finally, at the bottom of that setback is a publicly accessible path which allows pedestrians a connection between the alley and First Street, which you can see here. And you can see that Mount Hood will be aligned with that view. This is the multifamily building across the street, so you can see that its setback contributes to that impression that you get. And so if I can leave you with one thought, is that I want to leave you with the point that all of the massing and the articulation and the material decisions we've been making are really, we believe, in support of the vitality of the neighborhood and the pedestrian experience, as well as the variances. So we're happy to answer any questions. Thanks for letting me run a little bit long.
Thank you for your presentation. Mark, do you have any questions? No. Thank you. Kirk?
Yes, sir.
All right. Randy?
Thank you. I did have a bit of concern initially about the use of the concrete stucco, even though it is a concrete and not EIFS-based exterior surface. I noted with respect to the stucco primary cladding, your documents reflect that contrary to the manufacturer's cut sheet in your materials, the stucco primary cladding system will be installed as a rain screen with a cavity between the cement board and the wall sheathing. Could you comment on that a little bit and how that makes this surface more appropriate, if it does, for the Pacific Northwest weather?
Sure. In this climate with the moisture that we experience most of the year, we find that a rain screen approach is more appropriate for most claddings, in fact. And so having a space where incidental moisture can drain out of the wall tends to be the best approach, rather than having a situation where incidental moisture could get locked into the wall. So all of the facade materials that we tend to use are some kind of a rain screen or have some kind of a drainage cavity.
I see, thank you.
It's about durability.
Bruce? No questions. Okay, I have a few. Let me find them. Well, as long as we're talking about the stucco a little bit, and being a former stucco contractor, I should preface that. Your elevations have left out a lot of the control joints that you're going to need to make this system work, and it changes the look. And coincidentally, a lot of the photos you showed, our company did, and I think we missed it a little bit here. I hate to say it, but it's, you know, it's a big white monolith, and I'm not sure. I read staff's report. It meets the Oswego style, but I don't know. As I drive around Lake Oswego, my feeling was we could do better, and I say that, and knowing that most architects don't like my opinion, and neither does my wife. Say my architectural opinions aren't that great, but I'm very cautious on this design. How's that?
Okay.
And I think with the number of expansion joints and control joints you need that don't show on your elevations, it's going to change the look somewhat. It'll get quite busy.
I changed the slide, sorry to interrupt you, I changed the slide to the image of that southeast corner where we are showing those expansion joints. We've had consultation with the installer, and they've confirmed that the joints as shown here, you can just barely see them there, like coming down from the edge of the corner and at the floor lines, are appropriate for this particular system with this particular wooden frame.
Okay, and the control joints at the expansion joints of the floor lines will be big to take up the shrinkage and the.
Yep.
So the joints will be more prominent than what you show.
The joints at the floor will be a little bit more prominent because there has to be kind of a flashing that comes out for that joint to accommodate the drift.
Yes.
And there will be more minor joints to the corners of the windows, for example.
Okay.
But they are all relatively small. That is to say that we are also designing much more prominent reveals around the windows and at the top edge of the roof. And that is to achieve a molding appearance similar to what the classic arts and crafts style would have done around the windows and at the top. So there are a number of different kinds of joints that we're proposing on the design.
And you'll have probably a bigger flashing joint at the roof edge.
That's right.
Okay. The parking system, I guess I'd like to, know a little more about the parking stacking system. It worries me a little bit. Is there one, I know there used to be one downtown on Park Street years ago, but is there one that's being used in the area? My concerns are these. If the parking stacking system doesn't work, then the parking impact goes in the neighborhood. I mean, if it works, great. And here's my concerns. One, is if it takes a valet, let's say, to use it, and we get into another COVID situation, people aren't gonna be wanting to jumping in and out of other people's cars. So that's gonna be an impact to whether your stacking system works. Now, I talked to staff about this, and they said, well, there's no code, provision that would prevent that. But in my mind, practicality-wise, there's no code provisions for a lot of things we've done in the last year. So that's one issue for me. Another issue is what happens if you lose power? What do you do then? What about your drainage storm system that goes stored in the basement? If you have a problem and that floods, you lose parking. So those are my concerns.
Yeah, those are valid concerns. I totally understand where you're coming from. But at the same time, we're trying to balance the parking requirements with a vital streetscape and an excellent pedestrian experience. And we have to find a way to compress the parking footprint in such a way that we can make a great experience for the city and for the guests at the hotel. I think the technology of the parking systems has come quite a long way in the last decade. Just the development of this matrix type system that is offered by multiple manufacturers and has been shown to be reliable in Portland and elsewhere. I think we can. I'm sorry?
Where in Portland?
Where in Portland were they using it, Chris?
Sure.
Over in northwest Portland, I forgot whether it's 24th or whatever, James John, C.E. John built a building, and they had the system in it.
We have, in the past, deployed parking matrix systems in a number of buildings that we've been involved in Portland, and with a prior company that includes the Janie down in the Pearl District, the project on, oh gosh, what is Janie on? Cooch and 11th. There is a project in Northwest Portland called the Muse that uses a parking matrix system as well. 20th and Hawthorne, the one that Mr. Poinsett was referring to in the Northwest District. There are a number that have been installed in the Portland area. And I will make a note in particular about the hotel matrix system is that it is proposed to be a valet system. This is not going to be used by the public, so it will be operated by professionals and in the manner of having a hotel drop-off along the frontage on B, where guests will come check in their hotel, drop off their car, that will be valeted into the matrix system by a professional valet service that will be provided by the hotel. Then, as is often the case when you go to check out of the hotel, you'll have the opportunity to call down, let the hotel staff know you're ready for your car. Your car will be pulled out of the matrix system, brought around, and ready for you. So guests will have no interaction with the matrix system itself. It will all be handled through a professional company. That's the intent with the hotel.
Okay. All right.
Is it clear what the difference is between this matrix system versus a traditional mechanized stacker? Do we need to explain that at all? It's becoming more common, but it is less common than what you may be familiar with. These images here attempt to show it. So there's 3 cars vertically on top of one another, and you can have them in these groups of 3 wide, and that can go up to 8 or 9 wide as well. But additionally, these cars can also stack in front of one another, which is what we're doing in front of the hotel. So you can get this incredible density in a really small footprint. And the difference of a matrix system versus a more simple stacker system is that a simple stacker system just goes up and down. So if your car is on the top and there's a car below you, you have to wait for someone to move that car. The matrix system actually shuffles horizontally, forward, backward, up and down. It always leaves 1 or 2 spaces empty depending on how many spaces are in the system. So the hotel, while it is valet, as Sarah mentioned, just because we think that's appropriate for the use, in the multifamily, we're also proposing a much smaller automated matrix system. We think that is different than a tandem stall, for instance, as far as the residential or commercial use, because you don't have to wait for someone else to move their car, excuse me, to get your own.
I don't know that I follow you on the multifamily. Are you saying that you operate that yourself?
We have, and Sarah can speak to the logistics of this, but usually, yeah, they can use smartphones to just plug in the space where their car is. And so sometimes it's actually better to let the residents use the system versus using retail, but we have that flexibility.
Sure. I'm back again. So I should clarify that the intent at the residential is that the residents of the apartments would actually control the matrix system, and we've had that experience in a number of residential buildings in Portland. And as Chris was describing, it's a very automated system where you literally punch in, where your car is or the number of your space, and the matrix shuffles and brings your car down to you, and then a gate opens and you're able to walk in and take your car out.
Okay.
And then I think we did want to also address your question about what happens in a power outage, because we have actually talked about that. So I'll let you describe that.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah, for reminding me. So in a power outage, we will have a generator in the building that can power the matrix system to retrieve the cars during an event like that or during the power outage. And if that fails for some reason, there is a kind of a mechanical way to extract the car. That takes some time. The generator is really the best purpose, but having a power outage does not mean your car is lost in the pit.
So you would have a generator on both parcels, from both lots?
We do on the hotel. I assume we do on the multifamily.
We do have a generator on the multifamily, but I don't believe we have the matrix right now on that load. We're only doing the emergency lighting in the elevator. They also have hydraulic, so someone can come and hydraulically pump out the cars if need be during an emergency.
Okay. All right. And then, I'm not an engineer, but I did see that you were going to pipe the stormwater underneath the alley over to the other side. Is the city engineer here? Are we adequate? Are you happy with that?
Yeah, hi, Todd Neffer with this.
Hi, Todd. Thanks.
Todd?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'm engineering supervisor with the city. Yeah, we took a look at that, and given that it's kind of a unified site, we're okay with it as long as there's an encroachment permit that we're gonna approve. And that was one of the conditions of approval, so we're fine with that.
And the retaining tank or facility is large enough for both?
Correct, yeah. We had our consultant review the application and they found that it complied as far as the calculations go, so. And it's gonna be a storage tank facility, not an actual infiltration tank underneath, so it complies with the provisions of the code.
Oh, okay, so it'll be a storage tank and then it'll raise up and.
Yeah, one of the main points we looked at is, and the applicant's engineer is here if you got some further questions, but the main concern was no backing up of the facility under the garage, so that the stormwater won't back up and create puddles. And there's a subfloor drainage system, and it's all gravity, so it'll work, yeah.
All right.
So, okay.
Thank you. I don't have any questions. That's it. That's all I got. Anybody else? Okay, thank you. Okay. We now go to the public aspect of the hearing. First, we'll talk with those in favor, and Carol Okar, if you're here.
And I'm here tonight representing a neighborhood, so I'll speak for 10. Good evening.
Excuse me, could you state your name and address for the record?
I'm Carol Okert, 910 Cumberland Road, speaking tonight as the land use liaison for the Fan Forest Hills Neighborhood Association. The North Anchor development is an important infill project our community began planning for more than 20 years ago. The first iteration for Second and B was proposed in 2004, when retail space was renting for about $22 per square foot. Bob Galante, the Lake Oswego redevelopment director at the time, describing the downtown vision, said, "Creating a sense of place is one of the more important things we're doing." The North Anchor development concept has evolved over the years as the community and developers have looked to a valuable project in today's economy that fits the needs of Lake Oswego in keeping with that original vision and will serve our community well for years to come. Urban development partners understood from the beginning of their involvement that the North Anchor project is an important keystone project for Lake Oswego. They quickly reached out to the Fan Forest Hills Neighborhood Association Board and began a 1.5-year process of working collaboratively. Over that time, they demonstrated openness and integrity as they worked to refine concepts and onto plans to get us to where we are tonight with the complete project package before you this evening. North Anchor was a posted agenda item numerous times for our board meetings that were held on Zoom and open for both attending remotely and joining our board discussion. The UDP team presented at our board meeting several times, explaining their ideas, listening to feedback from the group, and continually refining their plans. The president of the 555 Second HOA participated. Jim Bolland, the FAN vice chair, and myself met with the UDP team as they moved through the design, always updating our board, always looking to a good project for our neighborhood that includes both residential and the retail north of A Avenue and the city as a whole. Lake Oswego Code is written with the foreknowledge that projects and sites are unique and may need a custom fit. So we have written into our code the guidelines for requesting and granting variances. The variances granted in this plan before you tonight are designed to fit the development into a constrained site on a sloped lot in the downtown core of Lake Oswego, all the while respecting and meeting the needs of the neighborhood and the city. But before I speak to some of those variances, I want to first highlight that the plan stays within our code-prescribed 60-foot height limit. Our neighborhood board was clear that the project should stay within that height limit, and both the hotel and the mixed-use buildings meet our height code outright. Because of the building design nestling into the slope on B Avenue and the way our code defines what most of us might describe as a daylight basement, there is a resulting variance request to accommodate 5 stories in the mixed-use parcel. My board looked hard at the options. The requested variance in this location allows for a more useful and more visually pleasing outcome. In the case of the hotel, the design pulls the building footprint 10 feet back on the north side of the building, reducing the building footback and creating a landscaped pedestrian walkway. We also noted that the 4 rooftop units that capture this lost ground square footage are much less than a full 5th floor and set back from street view. My board supports the limited 5th floor variance in the 2 specified locations. The Fan Forest Hills Board zeroes in on parking. We know how important it is that a project provide the necessary parking. We will not support an underparked project. The North Anchor variance request for parking allows the development to make use of a parking matrix technology our code could not have foreseen when it was written. This project importantly meets our parking code numbers while taking advantage of current technology to optimize this small site in our downtown core. While this matrix option might well not fit on other sites in other applications, in this location we have a fit. The Fan Forest Hills Board worked closely with the UDP team on this important parking variance. We recognize that retail is no longer $22 per square foot, and we note again that the developer is meeting the parking code numbers. My board supports this variance request, but goes further. We ask tonight that the DRC direct the city to incorporate signage that directs people unfamiliar with our downtown to the public parking available in our downtown at Lakeview Village, the Windward, State Street between A and B, and also importantly, the site across from the hotel on B and First. The B and First site is mostly public parking and needs to be more prominently marked from the street and keeping 2-hour parking between the hours of 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. It is important to Fan Forest Hills that we use a positive approach to keeping traffic and parking out of the residential neighborhood and direct it to already available public parking lots. Our code allows for on-street parking spaces to be used to meet code, even for residential developments. The DRC wrote a memo to the Planning Commission January of this year requesting PC study how to best manage this situation. This still has not happened. The North Anchor project meets our code and does intend to make available on-site parking for their residences. We appreciate that, but our Planning Commission needs to address this code anomaly. I have focused on the variances for number of stories and parking in my testimony. My board concurs with the staff report requesting that you find in favor of this North Anchor project application, granting each of the variances as listed in the staff report and the conditions that staff has noted. We have also reviewed the tree removal request and understand the necessity for their removal. We support the tree removal request pursuant to the replacement as noted in the staff report. The community has been anticipating redevelopment on this site for almost 20 years. Tonight, this DRC has the opportunity to take us to the next step. Thank you for participating on this ongoing process, and we are almost there.
Thank you, Carol. Are there any questions for Carol? Nope. I think on your parking issue, our memo is about as far as we can go, but I appreciate you mentioning it.
Thank you very much.
Miles Halliday?
Which one of these is working? Is it right here? This one? All right. It's always hard to follow Carol. She's so organized. My name is Miles Halliday. I live at 1074 North Shore. And I'm also the developer of the building that we would be looking up just up here, the Beacon building. A couple of things. First, our family is 100% behind this development. This is an amazing development. I think we all get into the nitty-gritty of it all. We get into, will the mechanized parking work? I've seen it work in a number of places. I think it'll work. We get into setbacks and landscaping. I'd love us to think back about, these are some incredible developers, an incredible hotel operator. When we looked at this project a couple of years ago, if you'd have told me this was going to be the answer, I would not have believed you. I think this is an incredible development. And as somebody who has developed just up the street, I know how hard it is to comply with the code of Lake Oswego. And I think each of you do know that. From a developer, when you were sitting there with your Excel spreadsheet trying to hit your IRRs and trying to figure out how in the world you're going to hit 15% landscaping, that should not be in our code. If we want development, if we want housing, there's a reason that we have hundreds of thousands of units that we must build in Oregon, and the reason we are so far behind. Yet here's UDP with a fantastic development that has tons of apartments and the hotel that we've always been looking for. This hotel we've been looking for 20 years. I've been told by the city it was gonna come for the last 10 years. We built an event center thinking it was gonna come. The event center is open, has been open for a long time. And now, finally, we get this great hotel. So we are 100% supportive of the uses of this project. In terms of design, I love the hotel. I think the hotel should be the thing that stands out in Lake Oswego. If there's gonna be something that's different, it should be our hotel, especially a boutique hotel. I think it's really interesting. I love what they've done. In terms of variances, the landscaping thing is just brutal. When we looked at it, our project, it was one of the hardest things to do. So I'm not shocked that that's the one thing that they couldn't really get to in terms of, I mean, there's a couple other things, but one of the main things they couldn't get to, I think they did a tremendous job in terms of complying with code. Last, on parking, I submitted some photos. I know this was a big issue when I came before you guys several years ago. I went out the other day at 11 o'clock, which is our quote-unquote peak parking time. We had six cars in our garage. The Windward was almost empty. The Lakeview was probably 25% full. Lake Oswego does not have a parking problem. Lake Oswego has a management of parking problem. I would really support what Carol said, and let's manage our parking a ton better. Let's stop asking developers to dump tons of money and then the city not enforce its own parking. I can't force people to park underground. I would love for people to use our $6 million parking garage, but I can't force it unless the city starts managing its own parking. And then last, just want to say again, this is a fantastic development. These developers are awesome. The hotel operator is exactly what we want. So I know when we get into the nitty-gritty of everything, I just don't want you guys to lose sight in the fact that this is a fantastic development, and Lake Oswego is super lucky to have people like this wanting to build inside of our code. So thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you, Miles. Is there anybody else that would like to testify for, neutral, or against? Seeing none, I don't know, do we have Evan rebuttal now, or?
Let's see, I wasn't kind of expecting that quick.
Yeah.
I don't have the sign-up sheet like you do, so. Okay. In terms of rebuttal, I think the testimony was in favor. Does the applicant feel they need to rebut anything that was in the testimony? Be rebuttal only? Just want to, okay, no. Head shake, no.
Okay.
So prior to closing the public hearing, any person may request an opportunity to present additional evidence. If a request is made, the public hearing will be continued to a date certain, not less than 7 days later, or the record will remain open for at least 7 days after the hearing to enable additional written evidence or testimony to be submitted. And the commission will establish a period for any rebuttal written evidence to be submitted. So is there a request to present additional evidence? Hearing none. Unless waived by the applicant, the commission will allow the applicant at least 7 days after the record is closed to all other parties to submit final written argument in support of the application. This information will be considered part of the record but would not include any new evidence. Does the applicant wish to submit final written argument? Head shaked, no. All right. With that, Mr. Chair, you may move to deliberation.
Okay. Does anybody have any thoughts? Mark?
Thank you all for your very well-prepared presentations. I would like to assure the chair, having spent 10 years of my life on the island of Manhattan, that parking technology has come, I think, along even a little bit further back than 10 years. And I've had personal experience with these systems. And I wish that I had had them in Manhattan when I lived there. The challenges of parking are going to be trumped and completely eliminated by this exact kind of technology. And don't worry about the power backups.
Okay.
Thank you.
Kurt?
I think my questions to staff kind of revealed what I was concerned about. I'm big on if the planning commission imposes percentages and requirements and code requirements that we should follow them, or the planning commission and the city council should change our code. It's one of my things that it bothers me that it's almost like we make everybody else follow the rules unless it's I don't even know how to say it. I don't really like variances just for economic perspectives, because every business person trying to follow our code, it's economic. And so I think that we should always apply the same rules to everybody. And so I'm struggling with imposing 15% or whatever the percentage is on some people, and then when it's a hotel or an event center or some other thing, then we say, well, that's okay, you don't have to follow that rule. Okay, planning commission, change the rule then, and so everybody is able to follow that. I guess I'm a little bit more comfortable with the stucco explanation by the applicant. I just thought that being from Southern California, it looked like it was a building designed for California, except for a few modifications. And so, and I'm not a stucco contractor, so I don't know about, joints and things of that nature. That's more your area. But if the design is supposed to be arts and crafts, and all the examples that were given to us, I thought the examples that were used looked like arts and crafts to me, what I know about it, but this building didn't look like arts and crafts. So I guess I'm just struggling with the idea that we have architectural requirements and then we don't follow them. So that just doesn't make any sense to me. Aspirational, that it kind of looks like arts and crafts, okay. But as I said before, to me, it looks like something you would find in San Clemente or Laguna Hills, or, Laguna or something like that. Not something you would find in Lake Oswego. So those are my two concerns. I guess one a little bit less now, based on I understand about it looking like Mount Hood and the snow-capped mountains and things of that nature. So that's all I have.
Randy?
Thank you. I too had concerns about the stark white stucco appearance of the hotel and its compatibility with other structures in the area and its compliance with Lake Oswego design standards of an architectural theme. But I did appreciate the applicants putting it in context and explaining that a bit more, which addressed some of my concern. I understand it reflects that style, or as an interpretation of it. And I did have some concern about the limited fifth floor on the hotel, but I appreciated the representative of the Forest Hills First Edition Neighborhood Association discussing and agreeing with the applicant's interpretation of how that accommodated some of the views and some of the streetscape and landscaping. And I also appreciated that the applicant did apparently work very cooperatively at length with the neighborhood association, which I think is important in these downtown developments and all developments. And appreciated Mr. Halliday's enthusiastic endorsement of the development design team. That was very reassuring. So those are my comments.
Bruce?
Well, my comments are limited. I'm a product fanatic, product liability fanatic. When the product is applied properly and what have you. There shouldn't be a failure. I shared in Jeff's comments, because I've seen buildings that did fail. But by the same token, done correctly, I've seen a lot of buildings that are holding up well.
I think our job is to see if staff did a good job, see if they followed the code provisions, and to see if there's something that we don't agree with that they've done. And I don't see that there's anything that's been presented tonight that would change my opinion to not side with staff. Despite my reservations, I like the fact that the neighborhood association is fully behind this, and I think we represent the city, the people of Lake Oswego, and we're supposed to, kind of listen to what they have to say. And, architecturally, whether I like it or anybody else likes it, doesn't really matter. Any building that's built, people like it or don't like it. Evan wrote a very good memo of how it does comply. And so for that reason, I haven't seen anything tonight that would change my opinion to support the proposition.
Mr. Chairman.
Sir?
I would move to approve as presented by the staff report.
Second.
Thank you. Kat?
Shear,
Yes.
Arthur,
Yes.
Smith,
No.
Silent,
Yes.
Poinsett.
Yes.
All right, this is a tentative decision by the commission, and written findings will be brought back to the commission at its next meeting on, refresh me,
September 20th, 7 p.m.
thank you so much.
Okay, that's the end of our public hearing. Do we have a management update, Jessica?
Oh. I'm sorry, I was still looking at the calendar to make sure I had the date right. The only update that I have is, of course, we have our meeting on the 20th. We have one item scheduled for that, which is a major variance. And then, of course, the findings for this case. At this point, we don't have anything scheduled for the first meeting in October, but I will certainly keep you posted as that could change if anything comes up in the next week or so. One of the things I do want the commission to be aware of is that the City Council has decided that they will allow testimony both via Zoom as well as in-person testimony at their public hearings. And they're already going to start implementing that. It's a little bit trickier for the DRC because we have procedures we have to follow, and there's some meeting management concerns when you're dealing with a lot of public testimony. So we are not going to implement that yet, but we have been directed that we should start to allow both online and in-person testimony. So staff will be working on that, and we'll implement that. The idea is before January, but probably well before that date. But I'll keep you posted. But the question might come up as to whether the commissioners would be able to participate remotely too. And our policy has been, and I would recommend that it continues to be, that we have our commissioners in person during public hearings. And the reason for this is that if for some reason there were technical difficulties and the commissioners their call was dropped, or they froze up or whatnot, that disrupts the hearing. And also, if we just have a quorum and we lose that commissioner, we have to stop the hearing because we don't have our full quorum anymore. In addition, applicants will often submit, or not applicants, but public can often provide testimony or pictures or things at the hearing, and if you are participating remotely, you won't be able to see those, which is important for you to be able to review all the exhibits. So my recommendation is that the commissioners will still be required to be here in person, will not participate remotely, But the exception, which has been our longstanding policy, would be that if we are meeting just to adopt findings or minutes, or if we had, for instance, a training, participation by phone or remotely would be fine because that wouldn't be a public hearing. So I just wanted to let you know about that, and if you had any feedback or concerns, we could talk about it now or we could talk about it offline.
Okay. I guess my thought would be that we'd either all go Zoom or all stay here.
Well, and the hearings, the hearings are going to be in person.
Yeah, we'd be
We are
in
going to
person
provide
and-
that, yeah, right.
yeah.
And unless the COVID restrictions don't allow in-person meetings anymore, we would still meet in person, but we wouldn't allow our current policy would say that the DRC members would not participate remotely, they would be in person.
And the thought behind allowing the public to join via Zoom, why is that? Why
Because it
can't
gives-
they be present?
Because it gives them more options. So for instance, if someone doesn't have childcare, and that might prevent them from coming to a DRC meeting. So it just widens the ability for public participation. It gives them another choice.
But that was true 5 years ago.
Right, but now that we have been implementing that in the last year due to COVID, actually a little bit more than a year, we've kind of figured out how it works and people are used to it, and we've gotten a lot of positive feedback. And so we've gotten, the council has received a lot of requests from the public to allow testimony via Zoom in addition to in-person to provide more options.
Is that, like, going forward, that's the way it's going to be, or just during the COVID issue?
At this point, the direction is that we would do this going forward. So unless the council reverses that, that's the direction we've received now. So I do not believe it is just restricted to COVID times.
Okay, because I'm just, when we had the Zoom with the different people participating by Zoom, to be honest with you, it was a disaster because people were doing other things, and then all of a sudden, like, the chairman is saying, so Mr. Boone, do you want to testify? Hello, Mr. Boone, hello. And then we're just sitting twiddling our thumbs.
Yeah.
And they're, walking the dog or something, so.
Yeah, and I think what we'll need to do is, in the notice, we'll have to be clear that if there's technical difficulties or if their call is dropped or they're just not available, we're not going to be delaying the hearing to accommodate that they need to, that they should provide some backup testimony in the form of potentially written testimony ahead of the hearing to assure that their testimony is included in the record, just in case they have issues like that. But the idea is that it would be another option. I don't know how many people will exercise that. Obviously, we'll still have in-person option as well.
I think what you're trying to tell us is that the city council said that's what we're going to do. So we'll get it, we'll make it work.
But I just wanted to give you, just let you know that was in the works. We are not implementing that yet. So at the next hearing on the 20th, that was not advertised as what we call a hybrid meeting.
Okay.
It will just be in person. But at some point in the near future, we will begin to implement that once we have to get our notices up to date, and we have to have language in our agendas, and there's other preparations that we need to make before we can implement that.
Okay. Anything else?
That is it.
We're adjourned.
Thank you.
I like it.